How to sew the Totally John Scott tote. Available in Indian elephants, John Street and log cabin shirts. Make the perfect tote bag, all featuring beautiful illustrations inspired by John Scott himself. Cutting out. Take the panel and give it a press. If you have a look at it, you will see all the fabric pieces are labelled with the name of the piece above them. You've got the front outer, the back outer, all the cut-out pieces to make the box bottom. And then you've got a pocket and labels where you can label your bag if you want to. And the pieces to make the pencil case, including the zip tabs that go on the ends. Cut around all the pieces and pin the label that's above them onto the top of the piece so that you remember which is which when you're assembling your bag. You can see the pencil case zip tabs there and the handles. Everything you need for creating the outer section of your bag. The cut-out pieces you can keep for your own makes. You won't need these. These are in the corners, and there's the labels that you can use later. Now take your lining fabric. This isn't provided in the kit. You need to have your own. You need 34 by 34 inches. Lay the lining fabric out flat and place the pieces on top. You will need to place the bag front outer on top. Lay them so they're wrong sides together. There's the bag front outer. Then you need to lay the bag back outer. Just leave a small gap between them so that you can cut around each of the shapes. And you will also need to lay on top the front pocket outer and the back pocket outer. As well as the two pencil case pieces, the pencil case front outer and the pencil case back outer. Now pin these into place, making sure everything lays nice and flat. Then cut them out all the way around the edge, including around those cut-out corner pieces. Here you can see I've cut out the lining for the bag front outer. This will now be the bag front lining. Remember to cut around those cut-out corner pieces as well so that they're exactly the same size. Then unpin them, and you can label or just remember which piece is which. I tend to keep them together until I need them for assembly. So there's the bag front outer, the bag back outer, again all cut to the same size. The front pocket outer with its lining, and then the back pocket outer, and the pencil case front outer with its lining, and the pencil case back outer with its lining. Now all your lining pieces are cut out and ready to use. Making the bag outer. If you want to add some padding and structure to your bag, use wadding for a softly padded look or foam interfacing such as Bosal or Styreville for a more structured look. Place the front outer and the back outer on top of the wadding or Styreville, and you can add any quilting details at this stage if you want as well. If not, just skip to this step if you don't want to add any padding. Place the front outer and the back outer right sides facing and pin together along the side seam. Pin together at either end and then pin together at the centre. Turn this around and again, matching the raw edges, pin together along the base. You don't need to pin around the cut-out corners because you won't be sewing these together at this point. Now pin together along the other side, again matching the raw edges and making sure the corners match up as well. Once it's pinned together, sew together down one side, not around the cut-out corner, across the base, not around the other cut-out corner, and up the other side. Now this is done, To get a neater finish, you need to press these seams open. So just rearrange the bag a little bit so the seam is laying flat and just press it open. Press down one side, then take the other side and rearrange it so that the seam is flat and press it nice and flat and open. Then repeat that to press the base seam flat and open. Now you're ready to create the box corners. So take the base seam and the side seam and place them right sides facing so that the seams match up. In order to get a neat finish, make sure those seams match exactly. The easiest way to do this is push a pin through the seam on one side, then have a look on the inside, move the pin so it goes right through the seam on the other side. Once that's done, you can pop a vertical pin in just to hold it straight to make sure the seams stay matching up. If you pin either side of the seam, you can then remove that pin. Pin together across the bottom all the way along. Now stitch together to create the box corner. Repeat that to box the other corner in exactly the same way. Now turn the bag right sides out, so this is the bag outer. You've now assembled the whole of the bag outer with the box corners. And push out those corners gently with your fingers so that they lie right on the edges. And you can see all the seams and the front of the back match up nicely. Making the pockets. Place the front pocket outer and the front pocket lining that you cut earlier right sides facing, making sure the raw edges match up all the way round. Now pin together along the top long edge. Place a few pins along the top, making sure all the raw edges and the corners stay matching up. Now pin together along the bottom raw edge, again making sure that the raw edges and the corners all match up. Now stitch together along the two long edges, leaving the short edges unstitched as these will be sewn into the seams later. Once this is done, rearrange the fabric so that you can press the seams open and flat. This will help to make them lie right on the edge when you turn it right sides out in a moment. Now turn the whole pocket right sides out. And fold it so that the seams lie right on the edges. If you place it nice and flat and just roll them gently with your fingers, because you've pressed the seams open just before, they will lie on the edges much more easily. Now press those seams so they're lying on the edge. Press the top seam and press the bottom seam. Again, just rolling it gently so that the seam is laying right on the edge. Now top stitch along the top edge only, not the bottom edge, just the top edge. Once this is done, you have completed the front pocket. Repeat this to make the back pocket in exactly the same way, using the back pocket outer and the back pocket lining. Attaching the pockets. Take the bag front lining and place it right sides up. Now take a tape measure and mark 1/2 inch above the top of the cutout corner on the right hand side, then mark 1/2 inch above the top of the cutout corner on the left hand side. Take the front pocket that you just made and place it right sides up on top of the front lining. Position the bottom of the pocket at that 1/2 inch mark and pin into place. This is so that this pocket doesn't get caught in the box corners when you assemble the lining later. Pin the other side of the bottom of the pocket so it sits on that 1/2 inch mark. Now make sure that the pocket is all lying nice and flat and that the side edges of the pocket match up with the raw side edges of the front lining. Pin together along the bottom and then pin it in place down the sides too. The finished pocket then will sit just above the base of your bag once it's assembled. Now, top stitch in place across the bottom, but just tack it in place down the sides within the seam allowance. Once this is done, your pocket is attached. Stitch the back pocket to the back lining in exactly the same way. You can also attach the label at this point if you want to, but that's optional. Now to divide the pocket into sections, you can put your own spacing in depending on what you want to keep in your bag. But if you're not sure, then just divide it into 3 sections. The easiest way to do this is to take a ruler and place it so that it's nice and straight and draw a line using a heat erasable pen down through the pocket to whatever spacing you want, or split it into thirds or halves depending on what you prefer. Now we're going to stitch these dividing lines into place. So to make sure it all stays flat, just pin the pocket to the lining either side of the drawn lines. Place the pins about 1 inch away from the lines, then you won't need to remove them during stitching and everything will stay nice and neat and flat while you stitch the dividing lines. To make the dividing lines stronger, as they'll be the most resistant at the top, start stitching at the bottom, stitch to the top and work back down to the bottom again. This will give you 2 lines of stitching and also make it stronger at the top. Once this is done, you've now got your pocket divided into whatever size sections you want. You can also, if you prefer, add a snap fastener. This keeps the pocket as a whole piece but stops it flapping open. Completing the lining. Place the bag front lining and the bag back lining that you've just sewn the pockets to, right sides facing. Now pin together down one side. Start by pinning the top of the pockets together, making sure, just rolling the front back to make sure they match up. You'll get a neater finish inside and it will look like one continuous pocket. So pin it together at this point, then pin at the top, and make sure the bottom of the pockets match up as well, and pin it together at the bottom. And then just pop a pin in between them to hold everything straight. Now pin it together along the bottom edge. Again, in the same way as the outer, don't pin around the cut-out corners because we won't be sewing those yet. Pin it together at either end, rearranging the fabric, making sure all the raw edges and the corners are matching. Then pop a pin in the centre. Now we're going to leave a turning gap in the centre bottom of the lining that you'll use for turning the bag right sides out later. Fold it in half just to find the centre point. You need to leave a 6-inch gap unstitched. So if you measure and mark with the vertical pin 3 inches either side of this centre mark, you'll have a 6-inch gap left in the centre of the bottom edge that you won't need to stitch because that's your turning gap. Now pin together down the other side in the same way. Again, make sure the bottom of the pockets match up and pop a pin in this place. And make sure that the top of the pockets match up. If you just roll the front fabric back, just like you did before, you can make sure they match up and pin together at this point. Then making sure the raw edges and the top corner is matching, pin together. And then pop a pin in the centre of the pocket to hold everything nice and flat. Now sew together down the side, not round the cutout corner, across the bottom, starting and finishing either end of the turning gap so it's unstitched, and stitch together up the other side. So there's your turning gap left unstitched. You can fold that back to the wrong side and press. Now box the corners in exactly the same way as you did it with the outer. Again, match up the side seam and the base seam and pop a pin in the centre, and then lay the corner out flat by pulling the fabric outwards and pin together so that the raw edges are matching. You'll sew this together with your normal 1/4 inch seam allowance, and because you placed the pocket 1/2 inch up from the bottom, there's no fear of having the pocket caught in this seam at all. So stitch together across to box the corner. Once that's stitched, you can then box the other corner in exactly the same way. So if you turn your lining right sides out, you will see now that you've got all the pockets attached. They sit just above the bottom of the base seam, which means that the pockets will sit almost on the bottom of the bag to give a neat finish. And there's your lining all complete with the turning gap. Making the handles. Take one of the bag handles and fold it in half lengthways with right sides together. Then press, making sure the raw edges match up. If you press it in half at this stage, it's just neater and easier to sew it together. Then pin together, making sure the raw edges match up all the way along. Now sew the handle together along the top raw edges. Once that's done, rearrange it so that you can press that seam flat. It's easier to make the seam of the handle lay on the edge in a moment if you've pressed it flat. I've tacked one short end together because that's easier for turning it right sides out in a moment. To turn it right sides out, the easiest way to do this is to use a turning tube. Put the tube inside and then take the stick that comes with it, and because I've tacked across the edge, you can just push it in. If you don't have a turning tube, you'll just have to turn it right sides out with your fingers. Pull the tube all the way through, take the stick out, and then undo the tacking stitches that are at the end. Now press the handle, making sure the seam lies right on the top edge. Because you press the seam open, this is a lot easier. But if you just roll it gently with your fingers, make sure as you're pressing along the length that the seam is lying right on the edge. Once this is done, top stitch down both long edges to neaten it and hold the handle flat. So there's one handle finished. Make the other handle in exactly the same way. Assembling the bag. Take the assembled bag outer that you made earlier and from the side seam, measure and mark 3.5 inches in along the top edge. And then on the other side, just move the side seam over slightly so that you can measure and mark 3.5 inches in from the right side seam and place a pin to mark this point. Now take one of the handles you've made and measure and mark 1/2 inch above from the top of the handle down. The handle is going to stick 1/2 inch up above the top of the bag. This will make it more secure and less likely to pull out. Now place the outer edge of the handle at the 3.5 inch mark and pin it into place. And then make sure the handle's laying straight and then pin it into place just a little bit of the way down, about a couple of inches. Making sure the handle stays straight by running it through your fingers, place the outer edge of the other end at the 3.5 inch mark. But again, measure 1/2 inch down from the top of the handle, so this is the amount that will stick out above the top of the bag. So place the outer edge of the handle at that 3.5 inch mark so that it sticks up 1/2 inch above the top. Then make sure it's laying straight and pin it into place a little bit further down. Now tack the handle into place along the top and a little bit further down at the second set of pins and then remove the pins. Repeat this to pin and tack the other handle to the back of the bag. Now take the bag lining and turn it wrong sides out. Place the bag outer inside, making sure the handles stay facing downwards so that you don't catch the ends of them in your seams. Now match up the side seam of the lining with the side seam of the outer. Make sure those seams match up exactly and pin them together. And then turn it around and pin them together at the other side seams. Make sure the front out of the bag and the back out of the bag are matching up. This is only important if you mind where the pockets lie on the inside of the bag, otherwise it doesn't really matter. Pin it together all the way around the top edge, making sure those raw edges are matching, and you can see that the ends of the handles are now poking up 1/2 inch above the top of the bag. When you're carrying your bag, particularly if you've got a lot inside it, it stops the handles from being pulled out by having the extra fabric above. So take care to pin it into place all the way around, making sure that the raw edges are matching. Now sew it together all the way around the top of the bag so that the lining is attached to the bag outer. Once this is done, pull the bag outer and the lining apart so that they're all lying flat, and press that seam open. This seam will lie on the top edge of your bag, so if you press it open at this stage, it helps it to lay nice and flat later, and the seam will lay on the top of the bag. So rearrange the bag so that you can press the seam all the way around. Make sure everything's laying nice and flat, and then you won't create pressed creases underneath where you're pressing at the moment. And turn it around again and press so that the whole of that top seam is pressed open and flat. Now turn the bag right sides out by putting your hand through the lining, grabbing one of the corners of the outer, and then push everything out through that turning gap. Now put your hands inside again and push out the corners of the outer so that the box corners lie right nice and flat. To close the turning gap, fold the edges under by 1/4 inch and pin them together. So pin them together all the way along and then top stitch along this edge to close the turning gap. Push the lining inside the outer Now you'll need to remove the second set of tacking stitches that you put in, that these were just placed to keep the handle straight during assembly. So just use a seam ripper to remove that second set because the handles need to be facing upwards at this stage. So remove the stitches from the handles on the front of the bag and the back of the bag in the same way. If you've used a longer stitch for your tacking like I've done, I used a number 5 length stitch, these are really quick and easy to remove. Now making sure all the handles are facing upwards and removing any of the extra threads from the tacking stitches. Arrange the seam so that it is lying right at the top of the bag. You might need to push the lining inside so that it's all lying nice and flat at this stage. So the seam needs to lie right at the top with the handles facing upwards. Because you press the seam open, it's a lot easier to do this. So just press at this stage before you stitch to make sure that that seam is lying right along the top edge. Now once this is done, top stitch all the way around the top of the bag, making sure the lining is laying nice and flat on the inside. Now you've done that, your bag is now finished. you've got lots of pockets on the inside with snaps or with dividing lines. You will have labelled your bag if you want to, and you can fill your pockets with all of everything you need for your craft or to take shopping with you. Making the pencil case. Let's start by adding the zip tabs. Take one pencil case zip tab and fold it in half, widthways, with wrong sides facing and matching those top raw edges, and press. Now open it out and press the raw edge so that it meets the centre, and then fold the other raw edge so that they both meet together at the centre, and press. Now fold it in half together again so that all the raw edges are folded into the inside, and give it a press. Now take your zip and cut off the metal end. That's the end that's at the stop, at the other end for where the zip slider is. This is so that you don't sew through it when you put the tab on. Now place the end of the zip inside the zip tab, so the end of the zip is right at the fold, and then fold the zip tab over it. So you're encasing the end of the zip between the hole of the zip tab. If you place vertical pins in, it's easier than to sew it into place. Now you can see the zip is encased inside the zip tab. Top stitch all the way down that edge to hold it in place. Once this is done, you can now trim the ends of the zip tab so they meet up with the edges of the zip tape, so you've got a neat tab stitched at the end. Take the other pencil case zip tab and fold and press it in the same way as you did with the first one. Now the section left of the zip teeth, so that it fits nicely into your pencil case, needs to measure 8 inches. So take your tape measure and place the 8-inch mark at the end of the zip tab, as you can see here, and then on the zip tape mark that 8 inches, because you only want to have 8 inches of teeth showing. Now this is the most important thing. Don't forget, at this stage you need to open the zip, otherwise you'll cut the slider off. So open the zip so the slider is nearly at the other end. Now you need to trim the zip tape about 1/2 inch outside, so to the left of those marks that you've made. So trim them one at a time. Trim the bottom one and then trim the top one. Those pieces can now be discarded. Take your zip tab and open it up. Place the zip tape inside so that the ends of the tape are on top of the zip tab. Now make sure that mark, the 8-inch mark, lies right on the edge of the zip tab, as you can see here. If you just pop a pin in, this is just to hold it in place, so I only just push it in. Holding the zip teeth together, fold the zip tab on top so that the edge of the zip tab meets that 8-inch mark. Then you can remove those pins and place them vertically to pin the whole of the tab, encasing the zip tape and teeth nicely and neatly inside. So before you do anything and sew it, just double check to make sure that you've got 8 inches of zip teeth showing. Stitch it together in the same way as you did with the other zip tab. Then you can trim the ends of the zip tab so they meet up exactly with the edges of the zip tape for a nice neat finish. And your zip is now ready, and will fit exactly to put inside your pencil case. Inserting the zip. Take the pencil case front outer and the zip with the tabs attached that you did earlier. Open up the zip a little way. Now place this zip right sides together with the pencil case front outer and centrally across the top. You will have about 1/4 inch either side. Pin it together along the top, making sure that the edges of the zip tape match up with the raw edge of the pencil case front outer, and so that the ends of the zip tabs are placed 1/4 inch from the side seams. Now tack it into place across the top, using a longer stitch and within the seam allowance, as I've done here. Take the lining, the pencil case front lining, and undo the zip to the other end. Now place this right sides down on top, so that the lining and the front outer are right sides facing, and the zip with the tabs attached is sandwiched between. Now match up the side seams and pin them together, and then pin it together across the top, making sure the raw edges are all matching and the zip is neatly sandwiched between the two. Now sew the 3 layers together using 1/4 inch seam allowance and a zip foot if you have one. Once that's done, open it out so that you've got the unstitched side of the zip tape. Take the pencil case back outer, place that right sides up, and place the other side of the zip tape right sides down on top. Again, make sure it's centrally placed across the top. You'll have 1/4 inch either side of the zip tab between the edge of the zip tab and the side seam. Make sure that the sides of the front outer and the back outer lay together so everything is nice and flat and your pencil case will be much neater. Pin it together across the top. Again, make sure that the raw edge of the back outer and the top of the zip tape match, and then tack together. Take your other piece of lining, the back lining, place that right sides down on top and pin together so that the right side of the front lining and the right side of the back outer are facing with, again, the other side of the zip tape sandwiched between. Pin together either end and then pin together across the top, making sure that all the raw edges match up. Then stitch it together using 1/4 inch seam allowance again. Now open it all up so that you've got everything lying nice and flat. That seam that you've just done needs to lay right on the edge. So press the outers, making sure that seam lies right on the edge. And then to double check, turn it over and press the linings, pushing them outwards, making sure the seam lies on the edge and the bottom raw edges are matching as well. Once you're happy that everything is lying nice and flat, top stitch along the top edge of the front outer and the back outer through the lining as well to get a nice neat finish. Assembling the pencil case. Undo the zip to about halfway. Now take the 2 outer pieces, so the back outer and the front outer, and place those right sides facing, and then the linings will be right sides facing as well. Now you need to pin it all together. Fold the zip tabs so they face towards the lining fabric, so you'll need to fold them in half, making sure that that top seam, the one that you top stitched, is lying so it matches up and the zip tab is facing towards the lining fabric, and then pin it together at this point. Turn it round to the other side, and again fold the zip tab in half so that it faces towards the lining fabric. Make sure that the top stitched seam is lying right on top of each other from the front and the back, and pin together at this point. Now pin together all the way round, making sure the corners and the raw edges match up. So pin the outer fabric together down one side. Pin it together across the bottom, making sure the corners match up first before you pin in the centre, and then pin the outers together down the other side. Repeat this with the linings, so that the back lining and the front lining are lying right sides facing. Make sure the corners match up, as do and all the raw edges as well. Now you'll need to leave a turning gap in the bottom of the lining, so fold it in half and make a little crease to find the centre. And mark that with a pin. Take your tape measure, and if you mark and measure 1.5 inches either side of this central pin, then this will mark a 3-inch turning gap. And you'll know it will be centrally placed. So just mark this. If you put vertical pins in to mark the turning gap, then you won't forget to leave it unstitched. Now stitch together all the way around, starting at one turning gap and going all the way around the edge, sewing close to but not actually over the zip tabs. So go a little bit slower at this point, and then go all the way around and stop at the other side of the turning gap. Once this is done all the way around, press the seam open. To do this, just press the top seam allowance over and flat, and this will press it open. It will just make it easier to get the seams laying right on the edge when you turn the pencil case right sides out in a moment. So just finger press it over and then take your iron and press that seam allowance so it lies nice and flat on top of the wrong side of the pencil case. Now clip off the corners. This just helps to reduce bulk in these areas so that when your pencil case is turned right sides outer, the corners will poke out and look a little bit more even. Turn the pencil case right sides out through the turning gap. Making sure that you pull out the outer of the pencil case as well. Keeping your fingers inside the lining, push out the zip tabs so that they lie nice and flat on the edges of the zip. You can undo the zip the whole way at this point. So just push the zip tab out so it lies nice and flat and right, and then push your fingers inside the pencil case to push out the corners of the outer. You can use a pointed object if you want to push them out, but just take careful not to pierce the stitching. Now do the same with the lining to push the corners out. Now to close the turning gap, fold the edges of the turning gap that's unstitched under by 1/4 of an inch and then pin them together. Now top stitch across the top of this turning gap to hold it closed. Give the pencil case a press at this point before you put the lining out on the inside, just to make sure that all those seams are lying nice on the edge. Push the lining inside and then put your fingers inside to push the corners of the lining into the corners of the outer. This will make the lining stay nice and flat on the inside. Your pencil case is now finished, and you can fill it with pencils or any other small items you want to keep safe inside your matching bag.